Thank you, sir. Respected guests on the dais and friends. Well, first of all, I would like to sincerely thank all the bankers here and the bankers around the world, around India, to have done this amazing work in the last 1 month. I mean, it's been just tremendous that you have worked, and also request the media to refrain from actually paintbrushing everything in some sort of a bad news. So I think we should be with thousands of bankers doing that, if one banker somewhere does wrong, does not mean the whole banking sector. I sincerely request, I think, Mr. Rao, we should actually start a media against writing on the media itself. It's high time we started that. And I had received this invitation to come and speak here before the demonetization. So when the news hit that we had to exchange cash, I said, no other better opportunity that I'll have a set of bankers, so I don't need to stand in an ATM, so I bought all my cash here. And it's like talking in front of bankers is always very scary for me, because finance. So I just want to ask a very simple question. Today, if I have cash in hand, it's a liability or an asset? On which line item should I actually put it across in many ways, right? So, it's like standing in front of sitting in front of people who are so immensely experienced in the banking sector. I remember my final year in IIT Kharagpur. So people think I went to IIT because I was smart. Actually, I'm not. That's because I went to IIT because 300 million Indians did not write it. They had no electricity, they had no access to what I had. I went to IIT. I was running a 100-meter race where I was at 50 meters, and others were at -50, and I said I went to IIT. So I think we need to be very careful in what we do in this country, right? So in the final year, what happens is there is an exam, the VIjaya, where all the professors who have taught you in 4 years sit in the audience, and you are near the blackboard. If you have not studied in 4 years, there's no point studying for that exam. They can ask you for any questions that you have studied in 4 years, which I had not. So I went, they asked me the first question. I was a graduate of energy engineering. So they said, what is energy? I confidently answered it. The next 8 questions, I had no clue what they asked. It went above my head. Then they asked, what's your name? I said, Harish. They all clapped, said, at last a right answer. Right? Then they asked, do you know the cream of the nation comes here? I said, yes, sir. I said, why are you here? Right? So the question is, that was 2 hours and 45 minutes of ragging. We talk about ragging being banned for students. Ragging should also be banned for teachers. Right? 2 hours and 45 minutes of pure ragging that I had. So after that, nothing in the world can actually disturb me anymore. Right? Your ego is so killed that everything is so down, there is nothing that can actually, kuch bhi koi insult doesn't matter. Now I'm so thick-skinned, doesn't actually matter in any manner. The question is, Mr. Rao said about CSR. I think the banks are already doing social responsibility in this country. The banks, the public sector banks, do not need to defend their work at all. Because what you guys have done for us, every banker in a rural area or an urban branch is a bank of knowledge. Not only he knows finances, you go and ask him, don't come, last 2 years drought, we will have NPA. The water tables are not so good. This year the cropping is good. You don't need to do a market survey of a village or a community or a college. He is a banker. He's a knowledge banker. You have built this country. When the agricultural revolution of the early 70s, along with the Rudsettis and the ITIs, while creating the priority sector lending, creating the rural banking system, no other developing country has 40,000 banks in rural India. That is exactly when we actually became self-sufficiency in food, that Mr. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh had the courage to actually open up the Indian economy in 1992. So you don't need to have a CSR component. You are already doing social responsibility for the nation for so many years. Tell me one developing nation in this country. We all talk about microfinance. Microfinance cannot eradicate poverty. You all know that for us, for any one of us to get out of poverty or to actually flourish, we need asset-based banking, asset-based finance. How many of microfinance can actually create asset-based finance? If the poor in this country have to get out of poverty, you need to make them not consumers, but asset creators. And that is what you guys have done for so many years. Long-term banking at the interest rates that somebody can afford in the rural areas. My question is, today, 40,000 banks, we, in many ways, unknowingly, because we are very poor marketing people as such, we are not like the Americans or mostly the Americans who are very good in marketing and packaging themselves. You have created the long-term asset financing of 40,000 banks, which not in a single nation in Africa, not in Latin America, nor in Southeast Asia have got that. If any of the countries actually need to truly develop, sustainably remove poverty, we'll have to go through the infrastructure that you guys have created over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And that is what the issue today, when somebody said for the younger generation, the problem is the disconnect of elitism in our country to the banking sector. And what I mean by elitism, see, sir, frankly speaking, everybody, somebody said I've got a lot of awards. I got a lot of awards because I speak English. Non-English speakers in our country have no chance. Paisa kisko milta hai? PowerPoint, Excel, and Word. Non-English speakers have no chance, right? You guys have created the infrastructure to create this entrepreneurship in the rural areas. If I go to any IM and talk about, boss, kisko DRI pata hai? Not a single hand will come out. LIBOR rates in London pata hai? Sabko pata hai. Right? If everybody knows LIBOR rates but not knows simple DRI, the differential rate of interest, there is a disconnect that we are creating, because any finance minister will listen to not a rural banker but to an IM graduate, because uska IM ka chappa. Right? If you and me did I keep telling my colleagues, you and me did a PhD on sugarcane, we'll all be called an expert of sugarcane, but a farmer doing a sugarcane for 40 years will never be called an expert. He has to listen to me because I have a PhD. Right? We have created, I'm not against English. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against English. My question is, I am against the thinking process in our minds. What exists? अगर जो अच्छी हिंदी बात करता है, जिसको अंग्रेजी नहीं आती, उसको हम देहाती कहते हैं. Right? देहाती, rural. Would we call Premdas Munshiji Dehati, the wonderful poet? Would we call him Dehati? The question is our mindset. If you go and buy from Big Bazaar, go and see it's very expensive. If a poor entrepreneur charges you on the street vendor, oh, she's cheating. Our mindset of thinking process has to change, because we all live in a society of middle class and above middle class, where our maidservant's kid has to be our kid's maidservant. That's the philosophy on which we have to destroy. We have created English. I'm not against, please listen, I'm not against English. We have created English and our degree system as a complete casteism in many ways. See, my father was in Steel Authority of India, Rourkela, where I was brought up. My father never had to pay electricity bill, paid by Steel Authority of India Limited. I went to IIT Kharagpur, I paid 35 rupees a semester, 70 rupees a year. I went to the US on scholarship. So what I am standing in front of you is a product of subsidy. I am a subsidy product standing in front of you, right? If the poor get subsidy, well, that's not sustainable. If IT companies get incentive on the land, that's tax incentive. But balance sheet में एक ही यार negative ही होता है, right? What's the difference between incentives and SOPs and subsidy in a different way? Not telling that do create subsidy to distort the market, I'm not saying that. But our perception to look at the poor in the country. See, my question sometimes, the frustration is, when I went to speak to some of the one top leadership in Bangalore of a research company, they have branches around the world, right from New York to Washington to everybody else. And the vice president was an Indian, born and brought up in India, had a PhD somewhere, came. After I spoke, she said, Harish, you have a PhD, do you actually have an intellectual discussion in the rural areas? That's the divide we have. That's the racism that we have, that we don't look at the poor as partners, we look at the poor as beneficiaries. We have to change the thought process that the poor are partners. Why can't the poor be innovators? Why can't the poor be inventors? In a country that does not speak good English, 70%, tell me China, how many CEOs in China do not know English but are Chinese speakers? French, Italy. Tell me one corporate head in our country who is a truly non-English speaker except Lijjat Papad. You cannot name it. Not a single. How many of the companies would actually take a Kannada resume? Why that racism and why that divide? Until and unless you and me create that opportunities for the poor to actually become that platform. Why can't a poor be innovator? I had a brilliant innovator who came in Chennai. What he did was, taking weeds out of between the sugar cane is very tough. No human being can go. What he did was, he remodified a vacuum cleaner. Brilliant thought process. Did not know the full technicalities, but brilliant thought process. So I took him, boss, thoda technical help ke liye. I told him, let's go to IT Chennai, professor. The first thing the professor asked, what's his degree? You killed the innovation, the motivation. I think we need to realize that every individual, whether it's a street vendor, whether it's a driver, whether it's a maid servant, how many of us, we all, on an every year basis, want promotion, want salary increase. We have a contract. How many of us have contracts with the maid servant? How many of us was always very proud, hey, driver to mera 20 years se mera saath hai. Did we ever look at the growth of the driver? Did we ever look at that he also needs promotion of a different mentality, of a thought process? We are all human beings. They are drivers because of a certain condition where the background was. He was not born as a driver. You and me were not born as something else. We need to create a system that is equitable, inclusive in a country where every individual is poor financially, but not poor intellectually. There's a difference between looking at the poor as finance versus intellectuality. We should actually, that's the talent that exists in our country. Numerous and thousands of entrepreneurs and rural innovators that we haven't tapped. And the only institutions that can actually encourage that is the 40,000 banks in our country. That's the only institution. You tell me what physical infrastructure that exists that actually can leverage. So as somebody said, the younger generation, I want to look at younger generation. See, my fear, because in the last 20, 22 years that we've been working in the rural areas, all the time, for all my, this 19, for all 100%, we have only worked with nationalized banks. We have, and mostly, and all the time we have worked with RRBs, whether it's Karnataka Vikas Gramin Bank, Pragati Gramin Bank, VIjaya Karnataka Corporation. We have only worked with those banks because we truly felt that these were the only banks that can actually create the assets. Now, what we fear when we were drawing up the plan for 2020, and what we fear is the bankers who entered the bank in the 1980s and the 1970s, obviously have retired in the 1980s. The next 5 years, the type of bankers who will retire, for us, it's a big shock. We are going to lose enormous amount of asset in the next 5 years. I hope we all realize that. The asset, these are the bankers, along with the previous bankers who created the foundation of the nation in many ways, who can actually balance social, financial sustainability together, that actually held this country together. So I request these youngsters to actually relook at how the elder bankers actually performed in this country. The youngsters to actually get beyond just banking per se. You are a bank manager, but you are more than a bank manager, because a villager, a poor person who is sitting there, comes with a lot of hope that you will be a partner for him. Need not be a financial partner, could be a financial partner, could be an advisor, could be a business planner, could be anything else. And that is the role of a true banker. Banker does not mean just loan liya, loan collect kiya. That's not the fun. The youngsters have to create different innovative financial, and this is the only country that can actually create that plethora of financial products. Because tell me, where do you have a street vendor who earns on a daily basis, a paddy farmer on the other hand who earns on a yearly basis, a peanut farmer twice a year, a school teacher every month, that you have created different financial products matching the cash flow of different client base? Those are financial innovations you have done. I hope the youngsters realize that. But if you have to then go into the next decade of development, and development does not mean social work. Let's be very clear. Development means how do you look at social sustainability? Because today what happens is the divide, as everybody would have read in the newspaper, that 1% of India's population owns 60% of India's wealth. So that is what? As long as poverty exists in our country, we are all anti-nationals. Let's be very clear about that. When people debate about are you national or anti-national, if a poor person, if we have 300 million people who earn less than 30 rupees a day, we are all anti-nationals, because it's your and my duty that we have got this education of this quality. We are in this privileged position that it is our duty as a nation, as an individual of this, as a citizen of this country, to make sure that it's an equitable race in the country. We cannot accept that. I said, so a couple of our colleagues in Hande, for example, this is 1 year ago. We are talking of a country that is growing at 8%, right? A lady, tribal lady, a midwife had gone to deliver a baby. The first thing that came out was a hand. The midwife didn't know what to do with it. They carried the women for 8 hours with the hand hanging out. We are talking of 2016. After 70 years of independence, the second largest economy in the world, with the largest number of engineers and doctors, that a lady in our country has to be taken 8 hours for delivery. This is Nationalism does not mean just carrying the flag and running it around. Nationalism means that every citizen of this country is actually having a basic dignity and equity of life. For that, you and me, we cannot wipe it. It is not my responsibility that somebody else will do it. That is the government's responsibility. No, absolutely not. What as individuals? We have 1 billion people, right? That is 200 million families. 200 families, out of 200 million families, if 40 million families had a dedication that I remove five families out of poverty, we would clear out the poverty in this country. Why don't we do that? Because the disconnect between many of the practitioners like you and the academic institutions and the industry and the media. We are in 4 different spheres in many ways. How do we inspire the youngsters that these are not problems, these are opportunities? Once you start solving, because India is a paradox of an overdeveloped country and an underdeveloped country. We have the parts of both parts of the world, right? This is the only country, if it goes to Orissa, can actually solve the problem by getting the solution from Bombay, Calcutta. If you go to Sudan, if you go to South Africa, you cannot. We are the country that can actually be the nation of solutions. The solutions that how did we remove poverty in the most sustainable manner? Because Africa, which is 5 to 8 steps behind, the only country that it can look for is India. Latin America is 2 steps behind. We have the capability to create financial innovations. We have the capability to do technology innovations. We have the capability to do market innovations. With such a young country in terms of average age of population, forget to be a superpower of military. That will not help any of us. We need to be a superpower of solutions that any country who would like to destabilize this country will think 3 times, because if I destabilize India, I will destabilize my own country. We need to rethink what our position in the world with such a talent that we have. We have to go out of our comfort zones today. Demonetization is one, but it's the greatest threat to a nation like this is poverty. We have to realize that if people like Hande and everything in the Northeast, I went to Nagaland with a couple of my friends, right? 6 months ago, when I went to meet somebody else, said, oh, he's an Indian. In my own nation, that I have to go and meet an Indian, I think that is because we have not created opportunities of belonging. And that is why I request the younger generation who is sitting around here, look at what the elder generation of banking have done. They have served the nation to the fullest. You cannot be complaining. They have set the stage of foundation. You look at 50 years ago where this country was. You look at 30 years ago where this country was. Look at today. Today we don't have to say that, oh, I have to do lunch. I don't know where my lunch comes from. A lot of us here, in fact. Your opportunity is endless. We cannot be a nation of complainers. We cannot say that everything the government has to do. The government has done a lane system. How come we don't follow the lane system? As we came to my colleagues, we always say, no, why do you wear helmets? We wear helmets not because we're going to get killed, because the police will catch us. That should be the inherent thought process of our country to create solutions. Stop complaining, guys. Stop complaining because there are 10 times more problems. Everybody says, I also see the dichotomy of the Indian society, right? I got an WhatsApp where multiple people have sent WhatsApp. Sometimes I think people don't have any other work or what. How many 4-day holidays will come in 2017? Right? So the other guy is asking, who is the victim? That means the 4 days banks will be closed. So the question is, you are the villains anyway. In what? The final days, oh, the banks are closed. My question is, the bankers also need to have holidays, boss. In terms of, if you are enjoying 4-day holidays, why can't you treat them as a human beings? We are in the compassion. Suddenly, one report, Nodi sir, yalla bankers hange. How do we paintbrush everything so fast, right? One person does, you paint back everything. So if a male person steals something, do we say that all males are like that? Right? So the thing is that we need to be very careful in how we do it. But coming back to it, the work that you have done, I don't want the youngsters to sit on their chairs, go out to the rural areas, and a lot of the stuff that many of the senior guys have come up from, they have first served in many of the rural and the semi-urban areas. That's, as I keep telling in my unfortunate is, we get 300 applications to 400 applications for internships, sir, every year. 5 Indians apply to work in rural areas. Rest are Americans and Europeans. So I tell the youngsters, if the Americans and Europeans know more about rural India in 10 years, don't blame. The number of years you spend in rural India, the experience, the thought process, the innovative, alli yaar hogtare sir, alli rural area, because unfortunately, you're glamorized but you're willing to suffer in a 2-hour traffic in Bangalore or Delhi. Not on traffic, but the pollution of Delhi is, please look at it's not about nobody is sacrificing. The only people who sacrifice in our country are the poor. We are all subsidized by the poor because we don't pay market salaries to the maid servants, drivers, and don't say we subsidize the poor. The poor subsidizes all our living in many ways. We hide behind the poor as a nation. That's our classic in the climate change negotiations. The poor, they have what made this country. So they have sacrificed the most. What can you create? Your financial innovative, when you become the executive director sitting here, 20 years down the line, I want to hear what more innovative products that you have come that has transformed this country from both in terms from a financial perspective, from an innovative perspective. That can only happen if you actually done the experiment yourself. And also request the management. For example, how do you create more incentives? Not in terms of financial incentive, need not be every incentive need not be financial. How do you create the appropriate ecosystem where many of the managers said, I do want to be transferred to the rural areas? That I would leave it, I challenge the management here, but I challenge the youngsters, spend more time, because that's the only way, truly, in the next 5 to 10 years, to make this country a truly developed. Developed does not mean like America. Like if all of us starts spending and polluting like the Americans, we need 9 Earths. We don't have the second Earth. The Earth will take care of itself by destroying the human community. If we are not careful, it will survive. Don't worry, it will survive. But how do we respect and create? We don't have nights. Even if I go to the European standards, if you and me consume like an European, we need 5 Earths. We don't have 5 Earths. But forget what the Europeans and the Americans have done. Why can't we be the nation which can actually show to the world what true development sustainability means? Let's not ape what they have done. Let's not think what they have done. Let us show them what we can do. You create a good financing program in a rural area of Gulbarga or in Nagpur or in Gadchiroli, it will be highly applicable for the slums of Chicago or New York. It's a high time we started showing the real value of, because once Philippines starts learning better English or Vietnam, the IT industry will go there. We should be the country of knowledge. Nobody can steal our knowledge. We need to realize the potential within each one of us. And for that, I salute the bankers, because I have, in my 25 years, most of the financial and social innovation I have learned from the bankers who joined the banking in the early 70s and the mid 80s. And hopefully the younger generation can actually learn, and we have 8 to 9 years of our time to turn around this country, not in terms of just pure economic, but in a socially, financially, and environmentally sustainable way, where a person in Togo, a person in South Africa, a person in Vietnam says, can I copy that model? Thank you very much for giving me that opportunity to speak. Thank you.